Good day. Welcome to today's conversation. This is a conversation where I host a guest, and through the prisms and lenses of such a guest, we look at the recent history of our country. Today I'm hosting an economist, a diplomat, an academic, and a politician, Honorable Muhabi Lungu. Honorable Muhabi Lungu, welcome and Happy New Year.
Thank you to you, my brother. I'm very grateful to be here, and a Happy New Year to you too.
No, thank you very much. You are a very familiar name in the political landscape of our country. People may associate you with MMD, with UNIP, with the University of Zambia, or as a diplomat. Yeah. Let's just begin. Who is Muhabi Lungu?
No, thank you very much, Ambassador. As you rightly say, I have done a lot of jobs in in my life. I think that some 2-3 weeks ago, I had been invited to be a guest speaker at the Chevening Scholarship thing.
Were you a beneficiary?
Yes, I was. I was a beneficiary of the Commonwealth and Common and Foreign Wealth Scholarship, okay. And that's how I did my master's. And so I was asked. They were celebrating 40 years of of the scholarship in Zambia. And they asked me to be a guest speaker. So they asked me to redo my CV. To see, and when I did it, I found that I had held some 10 jobs since I started working. So I've done quite a lot of things. Who am I?
What was your early life like?
Yeah, my early life was very interesting. It was it was privileged. Let me say it was privileged from the sense that I think that I had been given opportunities which maybe other Zambians had not been given. Although I was born in Lundazi district and grew up there until the age of 8, I had the opportunity to come to Lusaka at the age of 8 and lived in Lusaka for only 3 years and a half. Then my father, Kondo Lungu, he was deputy speaker of the National Assembly and minister of Home Affairs. At that point, my dad was appointed to go in the diplomatic service. So we lived in New York, Canada, and England. And I did my education.
Before you come to education, many people would not know that Honorable Kondo Lungu was your father.
Yes.
Because he has his own distinct political life in our country.
Yes.
Just speak briefly about him.
Yeah, he was. I'm the firstborn of a family of 6. My dad was, well, I suppose because my dad was a very decent man, a very principled man, very strong-willed, and believed in convictions. And I think that I would like to believe that I take a lot of convictions and his way of life from him. But he was a civil servant for most of his life, and retired, was forced to retire. He was actually forced to retire partly because of my activities in the political arena in 1996 as chief of protocol under the administration of President Chilua. And then he decided to join politics. I had already been in politics myself and stood in Lundazi as MP and I think that the rest, he spent another 15 years as a politician, as a member of parliament for Lundazi, as I said, rising to the position of minister and deputy speaker. So he was my dad, and I think that he imparted to me a lot of things.
I was privileged when I was ambassador in South Africa, and your father was struggling with the issues of health, and government would then evacuate them for medical treatment. So I was privileged to sit under him, at least for a few days every time he was in South Africa. And may his soul rest in peace.
Yes.
Peace. Yes. So tell us, you are.
He was very grateful, by the way, because he did communicate that you are always there.
Yes,
I was in Congo at the time, but he was very grateful for your attention.
No, thank you very much. So you are in Canada. Tell us.
Yeah, I was saying that we lived in New York because that was my father's first posting.
What was he serving? Was he ambassador?
He was first secretary political at the time. He was a young person. Yeah, he was in his 30s, at early 30s, in fact. And then he was transferred to Canada as deputy ambassador under Benjamin Mwenge. In New York, it was
General Mibenge.
General Mibenge, yes, he was the ambassador there. In New York, it was Paul Lusaka, Ambassador Paul Lusaka. And then he was subsequently transferred to England as deputy. And then from there, he came as chief of protocol. And I think he's one of the longest, if not the longest, serving chief of protocol.
In our country,
yes. In Zambia. Maybe the current chief of protocol may be closer to him. Well, not the current one, the previous past, Dr. General Blawayo. He also stayed there for quite a while. Yeah, so I was saying that some of the things that inform how I see the world is the experience that I had trying to connect the dots between life in Zambia, in Lundazi, Lusaka, and then living in these first developed countries. And my education started in grade 5 in New York. And I ended up finishing my secondary education in Canada in grade 13 and starting first year university in England.
They are up to grade 13?
Yeah, they're up to grade 13. If you want to go to university, you have to go to grade 13, at least at that time. I don't know what the situation is now. And so that part of my life has informed the way I see things. In as much as the part of my life, me being born in Lundazi and for the first 8 years living there, also has informed my life and influenced my life. I mean, I started grade 1 in Lundazi Primary. Then came here and did, I think, grade 2 at Thorn Park, and 2 and 3, 3 and 4 at Northmead Primary in Lusaka Central. Then from there, all of it was abroad. I think partly that is the way I speak, the way I do.
Yes,
I try sometimes not to be too...
To appear local. But the foundation was in, in Americas and
so
and
that is my early life. I think that it influences me to go into politics because I remember when I was the age of 17, we had been out of the country for 5 years at that time. We came home for holiday. And my father always believed that Lusaka was not his home and that the holiday had to be spent in Lundazi. So we arrived, and the way the trip started was that we started off, of course, from Canada. Then we arrived in London for about a week, arriving at Heathrow. And then we arrived at Lusaka International Airport at that point. And in my mind, I am comparing Canada,
Heathrow, London, and then Lusaka.
And then Lusaka. And when we arrived at Lusaka International Airport, to be very honest, it looked like a village airport in comparison to Heathrow and these other areas. And when we were going, of course, I was young and not having been exposed to the West. Then we spent 1 week here in Lusaka. And then we had to now go to Lundazi. And my dad was a very down-to-earth man. He didn't want to ask for vehicles and whatever from family, which he could have. He insisted that we go by bus.
Wow.
Yeah, so we went to the Lusaka intercity bus terminus, and we spent 2 nights there on the floor to get a bus.
Because the buses were not reliable.
The buses...
And there was only one single operator, which
that's
was
right. It was UBZ.
UBZ.
Yeah, and it was terrible there. I mean, people were sleeping at the bus station, sometimes for days.
So despite his lofty position, despite coming from Canada as a senior diplomat with his family, he put you to wait at Intercity.
With him there. And because you couldn't get a bus very easily in those days, you had to sleep there and chance a bus. So we spent, I think, 2 nights at Intercity. Then all the way as we went, the police used to stop you, asking for NRCs and things like that, and he would explain.
Because we were under a state of emergency.
We were under a state of emergency
at the time.
At the time, yeah, because of the liberation struggle and many other things. And that was an eye-opener for me. I mean, in many places that we go to the Eastern Province, you would be stopped, and sometimes you'd even have to offload, regardless of the fact that you were a diplomat. And he was deputy ambassador at the time, and they would ask to offload these things. We get into Petauke, the bus broke down. We slept in Petauke. Then we got into Tichipata eventually, and we had to spend another night at the bus stop in Tichipata in order to get a bus.
Get another bus to Lundazi.
To Lundazi. And I think that my dad probably wanted us to see the life here. Then we arrived in Lundazi, and obviously, although I had some understanding of it, because as I said, I grew up there, it was shocking. So at this age, I'm going through the comparison. And the question that kept on nagging me was, with this disparity of New York, Canada, and these countries as opposed to the village, is it possible that we could be living on the same planet? I mean, the level of development and underdevelopment was just too much for me.
Yeah.
And I was coming to terms with it. And it was at that point that I made a decision that I wanted to be part of the process of reform and change for my country, so that maybe we could uplift it to the levels where what I had seen and what I had experienced. Of course, we eventually get back to Canada. And as I said, I'm going now into grade 11. And then I decided, you know what? I'm going to now concentrate on developmental issues. So I went very much into social sciences, that is political science, economics, history, etc. Because now I wanted to know, how is it that my country is like this and these other countries? What like caused this? And what are the possibilities to try and uplift it? And that is how I decided to go in that direction, with the eventual thinking that I would obviously get involved in the political process at some point, you know.
Did you join your father after I was transferred from Canada to London?
Yes, I did. I joined him in all the 3 stations. They left me in Canada while I was still finishing my grade 13, then eventually joined him in London, and I started my university in London.
There's a particular experience you talk about when you're on radio, why your father's stay in London was short-lived.
That's right. Yes, that is right. This is really in confirming the policy of One Zambia, One Nation that I think that was very strong under the Kaunda administration. And that is when my dad arrived in London, the ambassador then was Peter Zuze, General Peter Zuze. He was transferred, I think, to New York. And within 3 months or so, a new ambassador was appointed to England. This was Mr. Wilted Piri. Mr. Wilted Piri was the head of intelligence. He was Minister of Home Affairs, and he was advisor to KK at State House. And when it was announced and the letter came that the new ambassador would be Wilted Piri, my father then called a meeting in the house and said to all of us to brace for impact. He said, we've been out of the country for a while, but I think now time has come for us. We are most likely going home, he said. So
what informed that decision?
Well, because of what had transpired. Wilted Piri was from Lundazi district, and my father was from Lundazi district. Both of them were Easterners, obviously. And the reasoning of my father was that in the administration of Kaunda, there is no way that a mission will have the head of mission and a deputy from the same province, let alone from the same district.
Yes, because Dr. Kaunda, in his national building project of One Zambia, One Nation, he was actually acting it out very practically. I know civil servants where, look, if you're a Lozi, you'll be posted on your first assignment to Northern Province. If you're from Northern Province, you'll be sent maybe to Choma.
Yes.
The integration was by decisions like that.
That is right.
He bothered about tribal balancing, and that's why I think your father immediately knew a Piri from Londazi and Myers, myself as a deputy, would not serve in the same space.
Yes, he said his exact words was that this is an oversight. Wow. It just has not been, and it will be discovered. That's what he said. So, because Bawulted Piri is coming now, I will either be moved to another station, but because we've been out of the country for a long time, we are probably going back home. So brace yourself for impact. Yeah. And indeed, within 3 months of Ambassador Piri reporting, my father received a letter of transfer or recall that he would now be coming to Zambia as chief of protocol. And I think that this story, I tell it because when people are being critical of the policies of other governments, they always assume that that criticism is either because you just want to be destructive, or as it is currently said in the UPND, they are very fond of saying hate. They're very fond that it's because you hate me because I'm from this, or whatever, or you are bitter and so on. I think that that is a wrong approach to things. There has been precedents set in this country of how presidents have been behaved. And as I say, in this particular case, and as you indicate, there was a lot of attention towards ensuring that everyone in the country felt included. And that attention even went insofar as appearance even. As they say with the legal system, that justice not only has to be done, but it also has to appear to be done. Yeah, to be seen to be done. And it was the same thing in terms of national unity and ethnic bonding and tribal balancing. It was a very serious issue under UNIP. And it worked. It actually worked for a long time. And
it was just not a slogan.
It was just not a slogan. It was something that was perfected to the extent that sometimes people who were more talented and gifted for a position were sometimes sacrificed in order to create inclusivity within the nation. This government doesn't seem to care about that. I mean, they are completely and totally oblivious. And every time that it is mentioned, then they accuse you of being a tribalist. If we want to keep our country as a united country, you cannot run away from the fact that this country is composed of diversity, of diverse ethnic groups. And we are all not the same. And when you put people in a room or even in a hotel or in a country that come from different parts of the country, there is an extra effort that has to be made for everyone to feel that they are included. And you have to pay a lot of attention to this. The current government doesn't seem to. It doesn't seem to care. Anyway, that is the views from a lot of people. I think that a significant number of people.
No, we'll come to, I think, when we discuss the weaknesses of all presidents, you have an opportunity. I think we will have an opportunity to discuss President Hakainde Hichilema's failures and successes and how your perceptions are or what informs your criticism. 1991, 1989, 1991 is a momentous occasion in our country. And I think our country will remember you, that you were one of those student leaders at the University of Zambia when the University of Zambia helped shape, I think, what became of Zambia. Just briefly speak to that.
Yeah, I was part of the student interim committee. We didn't call it UNZASO at that point. Because
what was it called?
It was just called an interim committee because if you recall that UNZASO, during the time I was at the university, UNZASO had been banned, I think, 2 years earlier. You know, so I arrived at the university.
After the food riots of 1987, I think.
Yes, and after they were in 86. But then there was also another issue to do with Angola, I think, Savimbi Angola issue and the position that UNIP had taken in terms of Angola. And there was a riot at the university, and so UNZASO was banned. So when I was there was no in UNZASO. Our interim committee was the one that facilitated the return of UNZASO. So by the time I was leaving university, and because of I think the incredible work which our committee did, UNZASO was unbanned. And the first elections, I think,
Would you remember some of the members that were in your committee?
Of course. I mean, they are all friends of mine. Until now, they are all very close friends of mine. So you had Edward Sefuke, you had Fabian Mwamba, who I think you know each other well. You had Greg Cornhill, Mato Shimawale, Mambo Musute, Lakson Kazao.
Lakson
Kazao. And Martin Kalungubanda was also on the periphery of the student union. There was, I forget the other.
So the router situation that helped change momentum, I think, for the call for multi-party democracy was an issue of the coup, and then the riots sparked by the University of Zambia. Just speak to us about how it occurred.
Well, in 1990, the government, because of the IMF program, the government withdrew a subsidy on mealie meal, and the prices just shot up. In order to cushion the vulnerable, UNIP introduced a coupon system. At the same time, the government withdrew bursaries to colleges.
Yeah.
Okay? Not to the university, but they withdrew bursaries to colleges.
Yeah.
We as the students at that point objected to that. So in solidarity with the colleges, we wanted to march to the bursaries committee to protest both the issue of bursaries being withdrawn
from colleges,
as well as the increment in the price of mealie meal. But we were blocked at Mulungushi there by the paramilitaries. So we decided to use another way through Kablonga. So we went through Kalingalinga, and to our surprise, the marketeers at Kalingalinga joined our procession. And as we moved, going up to get to Kablonga and then turn to go to the Ministry of Education, the one on just at the roundabout, the one that is near the roundabout.
Addis Ababa.
That's right. The group became so huge because so many residents in Kalingalinga started to join us, because we were protesting. And so the paramilitary then caught wind that we had changed direction. So by the time we get to Ron Road, we find that they had blocked us there. There was a series of jostling between us and the paramilitaries. Then we heard a gunshot in the air. And we scampered going back through the airport, which was then off, it was a place.
There's a lot of houses now, but that was an empty field.
Now that were not there. But at that point, because of the state emergency, it was an airport which was used by the military and so on. You couldn't cross there. But we as a university students and the whole horde of people in Kalingalinga just crossed. And when they fired, we started running back, again crossing the airfield. And at that point, some people turned going as if they were going to Mtendere. Other people turned straight into into Kalingalinga itself, and other people turned as if they were going towards ZNBC. And as this confusion of now shooting and so on, I think they were shooting in the air, is going on, I all of a sudden saw that Mwaiseni stores was on fire. Yeah. Where ShopRite is now in Kalingalinga was a Mwaiseni stores there, and there was a police station just nearby. Somebody touched it. And immediately I saw that, I saw looting. And within a period of 30 minutes, we were now getting information that Kukalingalinga yabuka na hevi. Na kumatero. Chawama. And it set on a series of just riots. I think they went on for 3 days. Now, at the end...
Well, many people will not understand at that time, I think the economic environment, the anger, the potent anger that was in the people.
It was very bad.
You can just quickly describe that.
The anger was very strong because the standard of living had collapsed. Zambia was a fairly decent country in the 70s. In the 80s, we started going through some difficulties, but the situation had become very extreme by the time we get to 1990. Yeah. And as I said, because there was also structure adjustment program, which was aptly named Satana Alinanse, Satana Alipansi. And it was invariably it was President Sata, I think, who gave it that name while he was a governor. He was a governor of Lusaka. And this has had untold difficulties on people's lives, and the economy really was in bad shape. Now, of course, you can go into the genesis of how it got there, which I think that it is important, but maybe not for this program. But the economy was...
No, give brief background. Look, we were an very prosperous country at 1964. So what has gone wrong? You can quickly just summarize.
I think the first thing that goes wrong for us was that 1 year after independence, Zimbabwe declares unilateral independence.
Rhodesia.
Yes, it declared, thank you for the correction, before Southern Rhodesia declared a unilateral declaration of independence. It was called UDI. And when that declaration was made, we could no longer use the southern route, which was our primary route for trade and the economy. Our economy was very linked to the south. Yeah. And we had to now make changes to ensure that we go elsewhere. Hence the building of Tazara, for us to access Dar es Salaam. That was a very costly shift.
Yeah, because as at 1965, when that decision is made, sanctions have been now imposed
That is right.
on the Ian Smith regime. And Dr. Kaunda decides to implement the sanctions. He could have negotiated with them and
That
used
is
the
right.
rules, but he
but
did.
on principle, he said
yeah,
no.
he said no.
I mean, there were others who did negotiate. For example, Malawi was
didn't.
still trading.
Botswana didn't.
Yeah, that's right.
Dr. Kaunda said would implement, and so our route to Durban, our route to Beira,
Yes.
and later to Lobito were all closed because these countries were not independent at the time.
That is right. So that was
the first one.
That was the first thing. Then in 1974, okay, the prices of oil, because of the energy crisis and the consolidation
the 1973 oil crisis.
yes, that's right, and OPEC now decided that they were going to control the prices. The prices of oil just went over the roof. Okay, it was very expensive, and that was our main source of expenditure at the time. Okay, at the same time, the world's commodity crisis of the 1970s also hit, and the price of copper then dropped. So we had our main expenditure going up, and our revenue going down. That was the second issue. Okay, the third issue was the process of getting the economy into Zambian hands. So there was the Mulungushi reforms, the Matero reforms, all of them which were designed to try and ensure that Zambians had a bigger stake in the economy. Now, the implementation of those also caused us some difficulties. And they included not only the acquisition. Some people say nationalization. There was never nationalization in this country. We actually acquired. We acquired them. We paid. Even the mines, we paid. In 1971, we issued Zimco bonds, which were the basis upon which we bought the mines. Okay? Unfortunately, a few years later, we then redeemed those bonds, and we redeemed them at a face value which made us lose money, more than $100 million. I mean, if you were to adjust it in today's money.
It was actually over $270 million.
That's right.
I wrote about that, I remember.
Yeah, that's right. So if you rebase it to today's money, it may be as high as billions. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So that was also a mistake, and so on. But I think there were reasons for that. Then there was also what a lot of people, when they look at the Zambian situation, forget is that there was also a global debt crisis that had developed, beginning in 1982, and the first country was Argentina that defaulted, which had a huge debt. And then all the other countries started to ricochet over the debt issue. So that by the time we get to 1919, we had a debt of $7 billion. But it wasn't only Zambia. It was actually a debt crisis. It was the first debt crisis in what you would call the development countries owing to the West. And part of that cause was because of the stagflation, hyperinflation of the 1970s, that even affected the American economy and the British economy. And you had many people losing power in those countries. For example, Labour Party lost in 1979 and Margaret Thatcher came in. It was because of those global issues. Jimmy Carter lost the elections in 1980 and Ronald Reagan won. It was because there were a lot of global issues which had a repercussion on the world, the world economy. So that was one issue. Now, I don't want to appear as if we want to disengage UNIP from those difficulties. I think while there were events or circumstances that created negativity within the economy, I think that the United National Independence Party had a role to play in it. What I just don't want to do is agree with what everyone says when they're analyzing that process as if everything was the fault of nationalization.
UNIP was part of the crisis.
It was part of the problem, but really, if certain international events had not transpired, we may not have been in the same situation. Now, of course, when we had to now
and we have to remember that Dr. Kaunda also carried on his shoulders the liberation movement
struggle,
of,
yes.
of Southern Africa. Yeah.
That was one of the issues. We did really carry the cost of being the frontline state in the liberation. And that also had a strain on the economy. But that is a decision we all took as Zambians at the time, that we should do this. Everybody was agreed. And it wasn't only a political issue. It wasn't only a political issue in the sense that, we wanted to be principled and so on. It was also an economic issue because we are a landlocked country. And we knew that if we didn't have any access to the sea, then we would have a problem. And of course, there was Mozambique on this side, there was Angola on this side, and all of those were still in colonial hands. And then, of course, there was South Africa, which apartheid. So the struggle to get involved, the decision to get involved in the political struggle was underneath it very much an economic imperative for the country for the long term, which I think a lot of people...
It threatened our self-existence.
That is right. It threatened our self-existence. So it had to, in a sense, had to be done. But as I said, the debt crisis accumulated, and then we were forced to go with the structural adjustment program, which exacerbated issues. Okay? In fact, in the years...
people associate the IMF and structural adjustment program to the MMD. They have no idea that the program actually started under UNIP. You can just speak to that briefly.
It started under UNIP because, as I said, we had a debt crisis, and we needed to go borrow money. Our exchange rate had collapsed. Some younger people may not know. When in 1979, 1980, the kwacha was actually more valuable than the dollar. In 1980, you needed $1.20 to buy one kwacha.
Wow, that's how it was stronger.
It was stronger. It was stronger in 1980. It began to collapse in the early 80s. Okay, then the reverse. By the time we get to 1990, I think it had gone up to 7, 8. It was even threatening to go to 10. I would have to look at the statistics.
Yeah.
So much so that in 1987, I think it was 87 or 88, we introduced an exchange rate control. Before it was not. So then later on they introduced a two-tier system where you had the dollar being and the kwacha free floating on the open market, but then you had a window at the Bank of Zambia which would control the foreign exchange.
Yeah, it was far better to trade with the dollar at the black market than in the official bank rate.
That is right, because they were trying to bring it down, okay?
Yeah.
So those were some of the difficulties that we're going through. So Zambia decided, and what we were doing, out of our domestic revenue, we were paying more than 50% of that amount of money to the IMF, okay? Because we were on this program. So in 1987, the UNIP administration decided to suspend paying money to the IMF and dropped to 10%. Okay? And for 2 years, we actually survived. 87, 89, the economy even grew because there was more resources being pumped into the Zambian economy. But by the time we get to 1989, we couldn't sustain it. So Zambia had to go back to the IMF. And with going back to the IMF imposed new conditions, which were even a bit, I think, harsher on the Zambian, given the fact that we had withdrawn. We had withdrawn for 2 years. And it is those implementation of those policies that then begin to create very strong hardships in the economy. On a point of knowledge, a lot of people don't know that the process of privatization actually started under UNIP. A committee had been set up.
Did it?
Yes, it was. It was.
Because it was part of the IMF program.
It was part of the IMF program, but I think that at that point, even the Kaunda administration had realized that they had moved a little bit too far to the left of the economic spectrum. So they were trying to get to the center. Now, a committee was set up. Subcommittees were set up for particular companies, and they said it was going to be privatization with a human face. So privatization actually didn't start with the MMD. It started with UNIP, okay? Which is really a fundamental issue. Now, you also referred to me earlier to my involvement, which I'll come to in a while. All of these policies emanating basically from the IMF created a situation which was very difficult in Zambia. and of course in other developing countries, which then had an impact on the political process.
Yeah, no.
Okay?
At the time, 89, 90, facing critical shortages of essential commodities.
That's right. It was
There's
just
decay to the economy.
Everything.
Yeah.
It was just insane. So those economic issues then spill over to politics. Now, at the same time, there was also a transition, if you recall, in the Western Europe. In Poland had changed. Ceausescu had been dethroned, and the Russia.
And the collapse of the Soviet Union.
There was Glasnost and Prestok. So all these things are happening, and they also influence talk within UNIP about democratizing, which is the other point I wanted to make. Even when before we jump to the MMD, UNIP had actually had acknowledged that they needed to
internal reforms.
So there was a commission that was appointed by Dr. Kaunda called the Haimbe Commission, the father of the current Minister of Justice, and who is also acting as Minister of Foreign Affairs. His father, General Haimbe, led a commission to see how UNIP would be able to democratize. The idea was that maybe we should begin to open up a bit more space within UNIP itself. And that report was then submitted.
Would you remember the year? Because I want to connect it to cause outside UNIP for the country to return to multi-party state. Was it earlier before the intensified cause for Zambia to return to a multi-party democracy?
It was definitely before.
Okay.
It was definitely before. I think it must have been either at end of 88 or early 89. Because the Haimbe report was supposed to be submitted to the UNIP National Council. As you know, UNIP used to hold national councils every year. So that report was supposed to be submitted to the National Council in 1989, the council they were going to hold in 1989 now. As they are organizing the National Council, other UNIP members began to write papers, okay, to inform the Haimbe report at the National Council. VJ had written a paper. Alexander Chikwanda had written a paper. There was a paper from the trade unions because the Chiluba, was also UNIP. I mean,
everyone was UNIP.
Everyone was. In fact, President Chiluba sat on the board of National Holding, which was a UNIP company. Okay,
on behalf of the workers.
On behalf of the union. Yeah, so he sat on National Holding, which, as I said, it was a unique company. So those papers that were written by Uncle Vijay, Uncle Chikwanda, and other people are the ones that then filtered to the university. And we started to have dark corner meetings, what they were referred to as dark corner meetings.
Yes.
By intelligentsia, people like Akashamba Tombikisita Lewanika, Dr. Mbita Chitala, and those people. And we were part of that process. We were already in the hierarchy of, say, the university movement at that particular point. And when the National Council was then held, all of these people were actually at the National Council. You can ask them.
Yeah.
And when the Haimbe report recommended democratization within UNIP, many members said, no, we cannot have democratization just within UNIP. We have to have a multi-party state. Now, at that point, many of us were saying that already. Students were demanding it, the church were demanding it, and the unions were demanding it, because these were the three so-called opposition in the one-party state. It was the student movement, the church, and the union. They were the core. And so they walked out of the UNIP National Council. And I recall that even Honorable Kavindele walked out with them, but with the aim of trying to persuade them to go back in the meeting. But they refused.
Why did they walk out?
Because they said that Zambia should not only democratize UNIP, but we needed a multi-party system. Okay. So and those were the essence of the papers that were being written. We're saying that we can't just have democratization within UNIP. We need to have a complete shake-up of the whole system. We need to have an overhaul of the system. And they walked out and then started the campaign for a demand for a return to multi-parties. But that campaign was very subtle. I mean, people would say things here and there. It was very subtle until the June riots. Now, after the June riots, the thing just kind of exploded after that. Because at the end of the 3-day or 4 days of the rioting, we in the University of Zambia were cordoned by the military completely. They surrounded the university. We couldn't walk out. and no one could get in. We were now hungry for food and things like that. And so then an arrest came. And first they closed the institution. And one of the soldiers that was cordoned the university was Mwamba Luchembe. Okay? And they were organizing buses, UBZ buses, to send all the students to their respective homes. And you know, the University of Zambia carries people from the whole, literally from all the provinces of Zambia. And then the university was shut. And the night the university was shut, the coup, Mwamba
Luchembe attempted coup then occurred.
There was an attempt.
The time that the president was, I think, on the Copper Belt for an agriculture show. Yeah, trade fair.
It was actually the trade fair he was there. He was there for. And in fact, as Kaunda drove to the trade fair, many people did not know that the coup had been quashed. I mean, of course, Grey Zulu the night before had been taken by the military to go to ZNBC and
make the announcement.
But he was scared and was refusing, and so on. But he eventually did. But by the time people woke up, I recall that my dad was telling me, because he was in the delegation of Kaunda, as they were driving to the trade show, people in Dola were surprised. But there's a coup. But there's a coup. and so. But anyway, after the coup, 35 students were arrested at the University of Zambia because it was assumed that we had been involved in the riots. Yeah. That, in fact, the riots didn't happen automatically. I think that they did. Till today, I really believe that they did. We ignited the spark. I think that there was already a lot of
high
gas.
Disaffection.
It was already very volatile. All you needed was a match to light it. And that demonstration
just lit
it up. Okay? So now there was a perception that the students were working in collaboration with the Americans, with the British, and that we were actually part of the planning process to get that thing done.
Yeah, so, you know, Dr. Kaunda, he looked for enemies and saboteurs everywhere.
Yes, of course. The system was very good at doing that. And you know, when someone stays in power for very long, the thing is that people now begin to compete for favors from the great leader. And in that level of competition, everyone wants to tell the story about the other one in order to gain favor with the other one. And I think that's what was happening.
Were you among the 35 students that were picked?
I was supposed to be.
Okay.
I was supposed to be. Unknowing to me, one of my best friends at the university was actually a senior member of the special branch. That's what I later learned, that my name and another gentleman named, I think, Sansa Mwanza, were removed from the list. And others got arrested. I mean, Edward Sefuke was one of the ones that was arrested. And for him, I think that the unfortunate part for him was that he was a nephew. He's a nephew to Emmanuel Kasonde. And Emmanuel Kasonde was organizing already
the multi-party movement.
The movement before it was even launched.
Officially,
but there were discussions going around. And so I think they thought definitely this is one of the channels. So they were arrested. I was moved, but I was told to just stay home. Okay, that I shouldn't, because I spoke at that moto, we were singing moto, Wayaka, and so on, as we were marching. And I was one of the ringleaders. Yeah. So it was quite strange. So much so to the extent that even later, when we were in the interim committee, some of my colleagues
became suspicious.
They became suspicious as to why I was not arrested. And there was even an altercation between me and Fabian Mwamba, who, as I said, is one of my best friends, who had received information that I was special branch, and we had a quarrel in a meeting and so on, which, and so on. But I was omitted. Some of my colleagues were taken, but they were released on the same day when my father-in-law, Mr. Edward Jack Shamwana, was also released from jail.
Because after the coup, there were momentous decisions.
Yes, the coup was foiled.
President Kaunda then released all those political prisoners, including the coup leaders.
Including the
coup leaders. The coup convicts like
everyone,
Jack Shamwana.
That's right. There was a general amnesty. That was, I think, in August or something like that. But before that, between the June riots and the release of all the prisoners, then the MMD...
The garden meeting takes
place in July.
Yeah.
Okay?
Did you attend the garden meeting?
No, I didn't, because as I said, I was told to keep quiet.
Okay.
And just... I was supposed to go there, you know, but although it was by invitation, but we as the student union leaders...
Your committee was a famous committee.
We hadn't yet formed a committee, then we had loose leaders. There was no committee at that point. You had...
No, what I mean as your committee, because you are, participated publicly, the committee at the university, with the riots and all.
No, this is what I'm saying. There was actually no committee. This thing was led by people who people would characterize as leaders within the university fraternity, but without position. So they knew who the troublemakers were. And
who the activists were.
Yes. So the interim committee was actually born shortly after that. Okay. And I was initially not even a member of it. They came to me later. So what I was saying is that the MMD then meet and then form a political party. Now, at that point...
Form a movement first.
Yes, a movement in July. And at that point, the union leadership now consolidates. Now we are now communicating with the MMD and so on and so on. But before that, the university was closed for 5 months. And we had to get to Kaunda in order to get the university open, because he was chancellor of the university. Yeah. So that is this is the second time I'm meeting him now we have a union. And I think it was very important, because later we play a very fundamental, fundamental role in ensuring that the elections are held. Okay? So after that, we now become almost go-betweens between the MMD
and Dr. Kaunda
and the government.
UNIP.
And when the MMD announced that they were going to boycott the election because the constitution was not to their liking, we then intervened as go-betweens, okay? And we started to organize a meeting. And the meeting was held at Mulungushi International Conference. In fact, it was called the First National Inter-Party Convention, okay? In 1990 now, it was early. And it was at that convention, which was hosted by the students, funded primarily by the donors, the Americans, the Germans, the Swedes, the British, which basically was money organized by Edward Sefuken and primarily myself with the help of some of the other members.
But you, the students, were the host.
We were the host. We are the ones who brought them together. And if I tell you some of the stories that we went through, as to bargain to the tweet was something else. For example, I remember that the night before the convention itself, I and Edward Sefuke are summoned at the house of the late Ephraim Chirwa at night. And we arrive there and we find, of course, Ephraim Chirwa, President Chiluba, and by then he had been president, and General Mianda. And me and Edward are told that you guys, you've done a good job for this and so on, but with the conference being met tomorrow, you have to switch the arrangements of where we sit. So the unit delegation was sitting on this side, and the MMD delegation was supposed to be seated that side. And they said, no, you have to switch them. And we said, we can't do it. He says, why? Because Mulungushi is already been cordoned off. This is a state function now. It has ceased to be
our function. Because the head of state is coming.
Yeah, the head of state function. So they cordoned off Mulungushi. No, but they were worried. They were worried about. There was a lot of things saying that Kaunda can kill and so on and so, which of course for me I don't believe. But I mean, people can believe what they wish. But they were worried that in their seats maybe they would put Mingalato or whatever. So they threatened actually that
threatened the holding of the meeting itself.
Yes, they threatened that they would not go. So me and Edward had to persuade President Chiluba, General Mianda, and by Ephraim Churi that they have to attend the meeting. And eventually they agreed. So, and in fact, we thought that they wouldn't even come. But we also went to the other side and said, well, there was this difficult. We didn't tell all the details, but except the possibilities that they may not come. So, and they did, but they did. Okay, so I sat on the UNIP side, Edward sat on the other side, and we had the meeting. And it is at that meeting, because it was a very heated meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, it was a very heated meeting, but Kaunda was shouted out by the MMD. At one point, Kaunda wanted to walk out. We had to plead. We, the students, and they went into. He actually left, and they went into the holding room. We, the students, had to go and plead with the old man. So we said, okay, you handle the UNIP group. Edward would handle the.
Because at that stage, the gloves are off.
They were off.
Things are happening that would never happen in this country.
In this country, before.
You know, Dr. Kaunda was such a strong figure, but at that stage, he's losing control of issues.
That's right.
A coup has happened. Student riots have happened. The political atmosphere in the country is terrible.
Had completely
so
changed.
he's conceding concession, but you know, he's still Dr. Kaunda. He's still head of state.
Yes, but people took the opportunity that he had agreed to now come to this meeting where they could now shoot
Abuse,
at him.
Yeah.
So eventually, we managed to get. We managed to get the meeting into control. I mean, the chairman was Matthew Ngulube. Initially, it was supposed to be. Who was the Chief Justice at the time? Lungu.
Lungu,
but the
yes.
MMD objected to Lungu.
Yes, so they got a deputy.
Well, it was us really who was choosing and trying to get both sides to agree. So they refused. I think they refused. They refused Lungu. UNIP at the time refused Archbishop Dijon. Was the other one we had because I think that they had their. So everyone agreed on Matthew Ngulube. So he chaired. And the two of us, me and Edward, were sub-chairs of that meeting. So at that meeting, it was at that meeting that Kaunda then agrees to withdraw the constitution, which was already in parliament and actually was almost passing second reading. It actually had passed second reading. Now they were now going into the final thing. So we withdrew the constitution. At the same time, we had actually the student union had actually got the church involved into this. As I said, I'd mentioned Archbishop de Jong, who we had meetings with many of the church mother bodies too, who we were working together. And when the constitution was then withdrawn from that, at that meeting, it was then agreed that a week later, there would be a subcommittee appointed. And this time the chair would be the church. Hence, it was at the Cathedral.
Oh, so the second meeting now to discuss details of the constitution.
It arose from the meeting we organized.
Okay.
And then
the church.
Then the
where
church
the
meeting.
Final
where MMD picked
clauses are picked and the good
team,
compromise for the.
And that is now where they finally managed to broker it.
So after all this, Dr. Chiluba becomes president.
Yeah.
And some of your colleagues are appointed at State House. How come you're not in the new MMD team?
Yeah, but I will explain. Okay. But let me just conclude this part because you asked me about how I get involved in this. So because of that meeting and several other things that we as student union leader had actually influenced, because a lot of people don't know this, I was then, me and Edward Sefuke were then actually asked to serve on the board of the Zambia Independent Monitoring Team.
Okay.
Which in the beginning, it was a combination of a Zambian team chaired by David Piri and the Carter Center, Jimmy Carter, the Carter Foundation, and the NDI from Emory University.
So this was to observe the upcoming elections?
Yes. It was called the Zambia Independent Monitoring Team.
Yeah.
And I was appointed as chairman for civic organization and volunteer mobilization. So I was the one who recruited all the volunteers throughout the country to set up the structure which basically monitored those elections in 1991. Okay? I had teams throughout the country. I think people remember the Zimt Church and everyone. Later on, we broke away, the Carter Center broke away from us. But in the end, they too depended predominantly on
your
the volunteers.
Infrastructure. Yeah.
Of course. In the end, relied on our foot soldiers because they didn't have that reach. They had selected, as you know, that many of these observer missions only have selection. We had monitors in almost every polling station throughout the country. to ensure that that election was
fair.
done well. And on the day of the elections, I had a team in Mwamba, and it was a very good feeling. And then so we move over now. Because of that, now to answer the question, you said others were given jobs at State House and diplomacy and so on. Because of my involvement in this whole process of transition, and of course there are many other issues which we cannot say here that I was involved in the whole process. Immediately after President Chilua takes office and is sworn in, I was the first person to be called by President Chilua before colleagues which you asked. Yes. That had been given jobs. I was the first person to be called. I suppose because it was easier to call me, because my father was already chief of protocol. Because he continued.
Yes.
I mean, of course, as I said,
protocol under Dr. Kaunda.
And then he continued. I mean, there was an attempt to try and get rid of him, but they realized that he had too much experience, okay? And that he was good. For example, at the swearing-in ceremony, because this is history, at the swearing-in ceremony, he was doing his job because he thought he was serving, and that's what he was. Although, of course, in those days, it was a party and his government. Yeah. So, and I was there with my team because we were also helping to control the crowd at the inauguration. Zimt had at that point gained a degree of respectability, which was quite big, and we were now even helping to control the. And I could see where my dad was now being harassed by MMD cadres because they didn't want him to superintend over the process, which was his job, because they said he was a unipist. So he tried, and he then just gave up and drove home. And it was an enormous crowd, and then confusion broke. So when Uncle Vijay arrived at the swearing-in ceremony, he found this confusion. And when he asked people, where is the chief of protocol? And they said, no, he's been chased away. Vijay had to go get my dad, literally from home, to come and re-establish order for the swearing-in ceremony. And I was there also a witness of this event. So my dad was kept for an additional 3.5 years or so on as chief of protocol. And as I said, later on he was fired, literally fired because of my involvement, because I had now changed sides. So because my father was chief of protocol, I received a message. My dad comes home and says, well, the president would like to see you. And I said, when is the appointment? He said, tomorrow. He wants you wants me to take you. And I didn't know what it was about. So the following morning, my father drives me to Government House, the one that is
for the vice
president, because that is where Chilua was living when they were doing all sorts of things at State House. I mean, they were fumigating it. There were prayers being held there. Some people had said that, there was just there was a lot of euphoria because of the change of government. No one had ever seen it in our lifetime. So I went and I had a one-to-one meeting with President Chilua. Of course, there were other people who were sitting there waiting to see him, and I remember Dr. Inonge Mbeki being there and other prominent people. But because I was brought by the chief of protocol at the request of the president, I cut everyone and we went. And we had a good conversation with President Chilua. To end the conversation, because I'm asking you a question, he then asked me, you've been very valuable to this whole process, first with just helping to organize what was going on within the MMD, because I was an MMD member.
Yes,
and
I was
at the convention, the first MMD convention. I was there, and so he said, "You've been," and I knew Chilua already. As I told you, I would meet him in several cases with other senior leaders of the MMD, and he said, "You've been very crucial to this process, and you've done it at the expense. You were doing it when your father was on the other side. So I want now to help you." And he said to me, "What do you want?" That's exactly what he said to me. Yes. Literally those words. He said, "What do you want?" So I was given an open check. Yes. And I said to him, "Well, I'm very grateful. However, I have already been given a scholarship by the British to go do my master's. The Americans have invited me for a program called Young African Leaders Project, which identified potential young people who they thought would be good leaders in the future. After that, I come back from the US, and I went, I think, for almost two months and a half. I came back. I said to him, after that, I'm coming back to get married. Then I'm going off for my master's. And I also already have a firm offer of a scholarship to go do my PhD in the US. Now, obviously, at that point, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do the PhD immediately. So I said, all of these have done so. For the meantime, I'd rather pursue those. So he said to me, when you finish your master's, okay, before you proceed, if you decide to go do your PhD and whatever, you come back to me and see whether
there could be opportunities
for you.
to
You
work.
must come back, and so that we can give the opportunity. So that is the reason why I
you were not among those that were first appointed.
No, I was offered, but
yes.
I declined. What I told the president in terms of declining an offer was really the primary reason, because I had all this. But at that point, I had already seen some difficulties. So I didn't want to be part of those difficulties. You see, the MMD, when it was finally formed as a party, had a number of very diametrically opposed groups within the MMD. So you had Labour on one side, represented basically by Chiluba and Newstead Zimba. And then you had the business community, which was also very strong, which was opposed basically to Labour, which was really represented by people like Emmanuel Kasonde, Ronald Penza, Dean Mwamba, and those people. Then you had the intellectual group. You had people like Aka, Dr. Mbita Chitala, and there were many others who were part of the very idealistic intellectual group. Then, of course, you had the young people who were just happy that we were now moving into the same, which is where I was.
Yeah.
But within all of this, there was also a group which, at that point, I was concerned about. I was concerned about two groups, which were people who were very senior leaders within the United National Independence Party, who, for one reason or another, gave the impression that an opportunity had come for them to now
agree with the people.
No, not agree with the people, but take issue with the Kaunda administration, because they had eventually become enemies of the Republic. People like Uncle Vijay and Humphrey Mlemba and of course.
So those that were either fired or disciplined.
That is right.
Yes,
that was
by
another
Dr.
group.
Kaunda.
And it was a big group, as I said. There was Uncle Vijay, there was Arthur Wiener, there was Humphrey Mlemba, there was a very big Scott Wiener and so on. So there was one group which I wouldn't say they wanted revenge, but an opportunity had come for them now to
fight back.
Yeah, now the interplay, as I said, this thing is a very long and complicated. The interplay between all of those groups. Elias Chipimo Sr., all of those, my own father-in-law, Edward Jack Shamwana. So the interplay between labor, business,
former politicians,
intellectuals, former politician was very explosive. And there was a lot of things going on underneath. Now, if we had time, I would have narrated to you what happened to the convention, which showed that there were tectonic plates in the future, but I don't think we have the time, because we've spent a lot of time. So the way Chilua was trying to play them.
And balance them.
Oh,
balance and play them. Divide and rule.
Both. I mean that. Both balance and play them, because they thought that they could control them. Many of these groups actually thought they would control President Chilua. And by the time we were getting to the end, I had, in my own view, I had seen that the group that now had an upper hand was the business community, the Kasondes, the Dean Mungombas, and there were other powerful business people who
were in the shadows.
Who were in the shadows but had given a lot to the MMD, and they began to take control. Now, at that point, I thought that the
people agenda might suffer. Did you?
Yes, this is what I'm saying. At that point, I figured that here, this situation, the people's agenda will probably suffer. There was also an enormous amount of influence from the donor community.
Yes.
Okay? So that the first budget, which by Emmanuel Kasonde prepared had to go and be approved in Washington. This is true. I mean, people can deny and whatever.
Wow.
So there were a lot of things that were going on.
Because they had to ensure the IMF program proceeds and probably accelerated.
Yes, and not only
because it was part of the change, remember.
And not only that, as I said, the business community really believed that this had to be done. As I said, there was a very powerful lobby of very big business community. People like, as I said, Ronald Penza and B.Y. Mwila, that group. It was a very powerful group. So it clearly looked like they were going to win the day. And my concern was, if the business community wins the day, what will be the repercussion in terms of economic policy? And I figure that it would be extremely right-wing, as we used to discuss with some of them. And there were many people who were already concerned, people like Mbita Chitala, Aka, and that group, okay? They were also concerned, and some of them were even calling themselves socialists, but they thought that, no, here, the agenda
it was not fashionable at the time to call yourself socialist.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, I wasn't a socialist, but I was not a fully blown capitalist myself. So, because of that and other things that I was picking out, because I was part of the thing, I decided that the better thing was for me to wait. Yeah. Okay, so I wasn't enthusiastic. I thought that there would be an implosion within the party, so I wanted to remain.
No, and in fact, there was an implosion.
There was.
Because I think by 1992, 93, we saw breakaways form.
The first being the National Party.
Yeah, you can speak to that briefly.
The first one was the National Party. They and before even they broke off, I think Emmanuel Kasonde had been fired.
Yes.
And other people who were senior members of the cabinet resigned, and one was accusing. Arthur Wiener, I think, was accusing the system of being corrupt. So things quickly deteriorated, and then by the time I get back from my master's, which was at the end of 1993, the National Party had already been formed. Yeah. Zadeco was formed a little bit later, but the National Party had already been formed, and there was already a chasm within the MMD, and they had clearly shown that they were going to pursue economic policy which was extremely right-wing. Rather than, so UNIP had moved from the left wing and was coming to the center, and MMD then
moved from the center to the right.
To the thing. Now that to me was the biggest issue why, when I came back from my master's, I said that I would not continue with the MMD.
Yeah, because the next time now Zambians saw you, were that you were now a critic of the MMD.
That is right.
And I think then you were being associated with the former president's office, Dr. Kaunda.
Yes.
Just speak briefly to those.
Well, I had, when I was disgruntled, first of all, with what the MMD were doing. I think to put it in a nutshell, I genuinely felt at the time that by the time we get to the end of 1992, okay, I was leaving, going to do my master's in September, I think. And by the time I was leaving, I had already seen that the MMD had gone off track, both in terms of economic management as well as democratic issues. There was supposed to be a movement towards redoing the constitution, because the one that was passed, as my colleague said, was an interim constitution. Yeah. And then they started reneging on a lot of issues which I think that all of us, including the student union, wanted. So I saw a problem. So I said, no, here I think that I will have to find an alternative. Now, when I came back from my master's, I was actually approached. An envoy was sent for me to go and see President Chilu. I will not mention the person because now, as I said, let me know. And I declined. After I declined, another person called, and President Chilu then was writing a book and thinking about doing further studies, and I was supposed to be part of the group. The team. So I declined. Again, I declined. I said, no, I don't want to get involved. But because I'd already made a decision that there was something wrong here. And I'm saying this thing for a reason, my brother, because some people think that when we take positions against the UPND, we hate them. Without realizing, like my brother, John Sango, that some of us have been doing this for a long time.
Yes.
And taking using principles upon which to base our criticism, not because we wanted the job.
Yeah.
I mean, I easily could have been a senior person.
Jobs were offered to you.
Yes. And my father was still chief of protocol, was still sending messages to me, and I refused to go because I genuinely believed that they were going in the wrong path. Then, while I was in London, I became very enamored with what you would call Afrocentric philosophy.
Okay.
You know, I was a kid who, in some sense, you could say was a bit brainwashed living in the US and Canada and so on, in terms of perspective. So I didn't have any perspective in terms of Africa that were very strong. In the US, of course, I stumbled into Dr. Martin Luther King, the Civil Rights Movement and so on, which enamored me. But there was another gentleman who was equally as powerful in the US during that time. And when I was growing up in the US, he was not part of the mainline media, which is Malcolm X.
Yeah.
And we knew about King, and it was part of even... But Malcolm X was actually not part of the literature until the movie came out in 1991.
Yes.
And then I became very enamored with that issue. So I decided that when I come back home, I would start a foundation called the Pan-Africanist Ancestral Conduit to promote blacks in science and blacks in history, a book by Chang Ant Diop about civilization and barbarism, how he explains how ancient Egypt was, the first 10 pharaohs or so were all African and not Arab. So I became very enamored with that, and I wanted to start a foundation. Now, a week before I arrived in Zambia, I saw a spread by New Africa magazine. I'm sure you remember. I don't know whether it's still on the stand. But it's still an online
New
Africa magazine, which was very powerful in those days.
It was very powerful at the time on African issues.
That's right. And they had done a spread on the KK Foundation. And that there would be a library under the KK Foundation. So I figured, you know, it would be easier for me to ride on the KK Foundation. So that is how I made an appointment to see him. And of course, he knew who I was because we were dealing with these issues. So I went there with books and tapes and audios and so on to entice him into trying to see whether I can create this foundation under the KK Foundation. And the old man, of course, was very impressed with many of the things that I had done and what I had written already. And he said, well, you know, can I think this is a good idea. Can you come back in a week's time so that we can conclude? I think at that point, the old man already saw an opportunity to try and get me in.
Into his office.
Yeah, because they were now planning to come back. This is now in 1994, okay? And so the next time I go KK, he says, you know what, I want to introduce you to a friend of yours. And that's how he put it. I want to introduce you to a friend of yours. I said, which friend is this? Not knowing in the other room, there was Major Kaunda, Rapson Chongo, Stan Muntanga, Tia Wonsekawa, and so on. And he brings Major and introduces me to Major. And said, no, the two of you should link up. And that was all. So we finished with this thing, and it's still on plan now to be part of the KK Foundation.
Why did Dr. Kaunda decide to come back?
Yeah, I will get there. I'll get there. Then 2 days later, I hear a hoot at my car, at my gate, and it's Major Kaunda. And Major Kaunda tells me, you know, we're having a meeting on Sunday. And it's a political meeting, but the old man would really like you to come to this meeting. So I said, I would love to. So I attend that meeting, and lo and behold to me, it's a planning meeting for his return. Okay? And at the meeting was, of course, Dr. Kaunda, General Masheke, the late Pat Puta, Tia Wonsekawa, and others, Rapson Chongo, Stan Muntanga. And senior people who I had seen on TV, and I was now sitting in Dr. Kaunda Kora. And that's how I become pulled
into his office.
The political office now. You asked the question, why did Dr. Kaunda come back?
Decide to go back to politics?
Yeah, well, he was asked to. He was asked to by the majority of UNIP members. It wasn't, obviously, politicians...
Yeah, because remember, he has formed a foundation.
Yes.
He's beginning now to transition into a statesman. Yes.
And although for me, I had always known that I wanted to be in politics, it wasn't at that point which I chose. So I didn't choose it at that point. I had been involved in the process of transition. But now I wanted to do something before I get into it. And then I'm called to this now. It's a long story, really. It's a very long, complicated story. But let me say that he was asked to.
He was asked.
As to whether he engineered the asking to, I cannot say at this point, okay? Because I arrived at a time when UNIP was going through a lot of difficulties between the president who was elected, Kebim Sokotwane at Namayani in 1993, and a faction within the Central Committee, okay? Now, there was, which led to the zero option and so things. And as a result of that zero option, with the MMD interfering in MMD, people felt, in UNIP, people felt that the only person who could resolve those issues, similar to what the PF have done
going
now.
through.
Not exactly, but similar, because the difference really is that while President Lungu resigned, but according to what I understand, that the Central Committee did not accept the resignation, Kaunda actually resigned. And there was a Congress that was held. Okay?
And the new president was elected.
And the new president and the new team was elected. There was President Kebim Sokotwane as the president, Inyamboyeta as the vice president. Sorry, it was Professor Mvunga as the vice president. And you had General Mubenge as the Secretary General. So there was a team that was elected. Now, because of the quarrels that had happened, you then now had this agitation that Kaunda should come back. Now, that plotting meeting, which I was invited to, was now plotting for how he should come back. And the best way was that, since people had asked him that we should then expedite an extraordinary Congress, because there was one in 1993. And so the next one was due 5 years later. So that is how then I become involved. Now, eventually, to cut a long story, the Congress was held, okay, at the University of Zambia, okay, in 1995. In June 1995. And Kaunda won.
He stood against Kebim.
He stood against Kebim Sokotwane and beat him resoundingly. That is the reason why I say that it is, sometimes I think that it is maybe because people were not there, that really the demand for his return was generated by the party, And it is indicated by the fact that Dr. Sokotwane was beaten. As others would say, there was a whitewash. Not Dr. Kebim Sokotwane was beaten quite convincingly. The candidate who was his vice president, Professor Mvunga, also lost to our candidate on the side of Kaunda, which was Inyamboyeta. And I was one of the chief campaigners campaigning for Inyamboyeta against against Arabi's nominee, because Professor Mvunga was Arabi's nomination. And Arabi was furious at me because I already known who he was, and so on. So he won resoundingly, and hence set on the stage for his comeback now.
Could Dr. Kaunda, what were his chances for the 1996 elections? Because the comeback would not just be in UNIP, but did he have good chances?
No, my own personal view is that you cannot be 100% sure about what the outcome of an election are. You can be relatively sure that the probability is this, okay? Yeah? You can be sure that the probability is this. But I know many people who think that, who say he didn't have a chance. Yeah. I beg to differ. I traveled with Dr. Kaunda to Livingston, to Copperbelt, to Northern Province. The amount of electric energy that we received in all of these areas was amazing. I mean, this is at a time where 3 years, 4 years earlier, UNIP, in order to hold a mass rally, has to bus people.
Yeah.
They were actually busing people to locations.
This is a party that was rejected.
Because even before the elections in 1991, a lot of people had already moved. But when he came back, there was no busing. The car sometimes would be mobbed on the Copper Belt. And traffic would just stand, police would try to come, and it was electric, really. Now, does that mean that he was going to win? I think that he had a good chance of winning. I really do. I mean, that is my honest opinion. You can call me biased because I was part of the team, but I think that to say that he didn't have a chance is not correct. In fact, I do know that one of the reasons which the MMD did everything possible to stop him
Using the constitution changes.
Using the constitution, but that was not the only part. I mean, they did a lot of things. They tried to deport him, declared him stateless and tried to deport him. Then
he was shot at.
Then he was shot at, you know. Then all his team at Kalundu, myself, Kaulungombe, the head of security, Rapson Chongo, the chief of staff, Inyamboyeta, who was his number 2, were all arrested under the Black Mamba, if you recall. They did everything to stop it. And the reason they did so is because I have actually proof that the intelligence and other sub-intelligence and other wings actually said to the president that there is a good chance that he can beat you. That's what they said. The information on the ground had indicated that there was a good chance that President Chiluba...
Because the economy was biting, the structural reforms were not forgiving.
They were not forgiving.
You know, the state-owned enterprises were closed because to make the decisions that Chiluba made, I think were very, very hard decisions. So for politics, people sometimes want immediate solutions. And if Dr. Kaunda's electability was a choice, they could begin to find out if that is possible.
And there's even biblical incidents in this. I always tell people, even when you speak about President Lungu, obviously people probably know my view already about the return about former heads of state. For me, I'm not very keen, to be very honest. Not because of individuals, but because of what I've experienced. Yeah. But I tell people that former heads of state seem to be very important. Because even when you go to the history of the Jews, even after they left Egypt, okay, when they were stuck in the desert,
people remembered Egypt.
People remembered Egypt.
That the lashes are better, but we're having
even
meat.
Under the fact that they said, no, but at least we used to have bread, until the issue of manna and so on. So in all jurisdictions, former heads of states carry a lot of weight, and in some case, and in many cases they do win. There's Lula and whatever and so on. Is it right for them to come back? I personally have some difficulties, but that is not maybe that's the discussion for another day. So I think that he had a chance. And what proves that he had a chance is the manner in which the MMD treated him and eventually excluded him from an election. Yeah. So I think that to me, that was the issue. But from a personal point of view, from a personal point of view, I didn't join UNIP because I wanted Kaunda to win. I joined UNIP because I thought that because we are now in a multi-party state, democracy had to be protected at all costs. The MMD had reneged on some of the promises they made, and that the only way that we could get them to maybe reconsider even the process of privatization is to have a strong opposition. So I went deliberately, after I was invited, I agreed to be part of UNIP because I thought we needed checks and balances.
The build up to the 1996 elections, you were a prominent figure discussing with the leaders of MMD ministers.
Yes, that's right.
What was your opposition to the economic policies, especially
I thought
that were being enacted
by... It was too extreme. The economic position of the MMD was too extreme. I disagreed with the privatization process. As I said, there was already some recommendations that were made in the privatization committee which UNIP had done, which as a student had become familiar with. And I was against myself personally. Total, wholesale, outright reversal of the ownership structure of many of the companies as well as the mines, particularly the mines. You know, and we were arguing. I used to have arguments with Ronald Penza. Penza was a very amiable gentleman. I mean, Penza would stop me in the road and started debating with me about this issue. You know,
he was the face of the liberal policies of the MMD.
That is right. And I always say, you guys are going too extreme. He was some saying, but why don't you join us to be part of it? He said, you guys have gone too extreme. And the issue was that we had taken over control of most of the businesses, including the mines, to the extent that we were majority shareholders. There were minority shareholders. We would have preferred a reversal. I would have preferred, and many people in UNIP had preferred a reversal where we had just flipped it, where UNIP, where the government would hold the 45% shares, and then the private sector would hold the balance of 55. Some equation where we kept a significant chunk of what we had acquired maybe 15 years earlier. But the MMD were not interested. They wanted complete privatization in which the state's share dropped to 15, in some cases 10%, which I think was a big mistake. And those are the issues which we were arguing, that you don't have to flip this completely on the other side and lose all our shareholding. Can we just adjust it? And I think that had that policy been taken, this country today would be in a far better position. But because we swung, and then you had people losing jobs, I do recall that at one meeting that I attended with Dr. Kaunda with the Swedish ambassador, okay, that the Swedish ambassador revealed to KK, I was in the meeting as a special assistant, that they were prepared and they had actually had budgeted for $300 or $350 million to inject in Zambia Airways, to save it. And that the government was not interested in saving Zambia Airways. Okay? I mean, similar to what they had said now. They felt that the reasons why the government was not so keen in saving Zambia Airways is because there was another airline which some ministers
were pushing.
And so it was in the best interest of those ministers to have Zambia Airways liquidated.
Go down.
But there was money. And I'm telling you, from this, the Swedes said there was, I think it was 350 million. They were prepared to inject in Zambia Airways, provided that there was a restructuring of the company and that it was going to be run on a commercial basis.
Okay.
And to tell you the truth, Zambia Airways, the international routes, were actually quite profitable. I mean,
it was flying to London.
So,
it had introduced a flight to New York.
That is right. And so
it
things
had
like that.
Local and regional presence.
That's right. Things like that were very painful to many of us. And I recall that this time I was in New York. My ambassador, I was his deputy, Dr. Simbiakula was telling me that when he was in Washington, there was a celebration about Ethiopian Airways reaching, I don't know whether it was 20 years or 30 years of flights to New York and so on and so on. And he'd been invited to this. So when he said to one of the Ethiopian people that, we actually started first here. We actually were landing in New York before Ethiopian Airways landed in New York. So some people laughed. They said, no, that cannot be true. And one of the guy from Cote d'Ivoire says, no, that is true. I actually took that flight to New York. So that is how far we were. And had Zambian Airways been saved and remodeled and whatever, we may have been the primary airline
in Africa.
But we chose not to. So there were similar companies which I think that could have been restructured, and people were willing to help, which the MMD decided not to do because there were other agendas.
No, the sub-program across Africa, there's even been an apology letter by the IMF. Were very, very, I think they were fast-tracked and they deindustrialized Africa, including Zambia.
Yes, that is right. They did. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So I think that was the major issue you asked me about it. I was against, and that is why I willingly, after I was invited, decided to be a member.
Not to go to MMD, but to be with Dr. Kaunda.
I quit, basically. I had an MMD card. I quit. So nowadays, many years later, many people associate me with UNIP more than, after, of course, before I became National Secretary of MMD. But that associated me with UNIP rather than with MMD.
Yet
but my venture into the political arena is actually with MMD. I was a member of the MMD, as I said, I was at the convention. And I think I played, with my colleagues, when Fabi and Mwamba and so on, played a critical role.
Yeah. This segment, I want us to begin to review, I think, the performance of our 7 presidents. But briefly tell me about your association with President Hakainde Hichilema. How did you know him? How did you meet him? Did you meet him politically? Just begin to speak to that.
Many times. I think many times. I think that the first time I meet him face to face was at his house It was not a pleasant meeting. I think I had lost my temper.
Why? What happened?
They were trying to recruit me. He called me himself. I think he was at in one of the provinces, whether it was Western Province or Northwestern Province, I can't remember. But I don't know who gave him my number, but he called me, said, "My young brother, can you come and we talk and blah, blah, blah. We want you to work with us," and so on and so on. And I said to him, "Well, I can't make any commitments, but I am not against meeting anyone. So we can meet." So he said, "Oh, in 2 weeks' time, I will call you, and we have a meeting." Now, after that, he then started sending me invoice several times. And they would call me, "No, we want to meet you." Young youth people, maybe, they would come and meet me and say, "Oh, as if they were assessing me. I think that maybe he had some, well, I don't know, but it looks like they were assessing me. So, I played along until the third meeting. I got angry. A group of people came to see me at Intercontinental Hotel.
Yeah.
So I told him, I said, "You guys, I'm not a person with an ego. I know that some people may think that I'm arrogant because of the way I express myself, but I don't have any ego. And when party cadres from anywhere call me to speak, I will drive alone, whether they want me to meet them in Kalingalinga or in Baoleni or in Chawama, I go. And I'm very open with them with what I can do and what I cannot do. I don't have a chip of shoulder with bodyguards surrounding me, and so I never do. You come to this meeting now. But I have also been approached by a lot of important people who have come to me, starting with Kaunda, the Chilubas, and I started mentioning to me. And these people have no frills. Why is this person, who is the president of an opposition party, behaving in a manner that he is some sort of a Christ? That's what I said, that some sort of a Messiah, where he calls me himself, he says he wants to meet me, then he's now playing what I call evasive game. Does he want me to plead to meet him? That's what I told him, because I'm not the one who called him. Does he want me to plead to meet him? So I told him, no, they started making excuses. I said, "Look, he called me, and now this is the third meeting in which you're
discussing the same thing.
Things and whatever and so on. What is this? So you go and tell him that I'm not pleased, and this is the first indication, in my view, of a person I consider to be arrogant. I'm telling you that I consider to be arrogant because people have come to my house. Big people have come to my house and sat in my little chairs. Why is he behaving as if I should go and plead? So I said, you go and tell him that every time I have any meeting with these people who he has sent, my rating of him
is coming down.
Is coming down. So I'm not going to meet anymore. So you'll be very explicit. So I think that they went and told him. So I think 2 days later he calls me and very polite, "No, my brother, I hear you said some strong words. He apologized that it's whatever and so on, but let us meet. I'm even prepared to come to your house," because that is what
you had
said.
said.
I said to them, "Look, I didn't tell your people that I wanted you to come to my house. I was giving them the way I feel. I feel as if you are playing some sort of game of who's bigger.
Yeah.
And I am not comfortable with people. I've grown around power all my life. I'm not going to sit with people who see themselves as larger than life. I'm not saying that I'm larger than life. I'm just saying I'm not used to this." So he says, no. I said, "I'm prepared to come to your house if you still want to meet me." So we eventually met at his house. Now, by that time, I was already offended and I was quite angry. I have to be very honest. So when we first met, and he was with, I can't recall whether he was with the Maxwell Bayani or the Minister of Education now.
Siakalima.
Because I had met him several times. Once with the Siakalima, once with Bayani, once with 2 or 3 times with the current Minister of the. As I said, my association with him has been quite long. So when I got to the house, I went with a chifukushi.
Yeah.
Okay, and we started to argue. And I said, I think I used some very strong words. And then he actually also shot back and tried to defend himself. But in the end, the two, I had gone with a colleague, and the one he was with kind of controlled the situation in which we began to speak. So, but as I said, it was quite an aggressive meeting. After that, I met him when President Sata, the call one. I mean, there were a number of other meetings in between. But after that, I met him when President Sata fired those judges. You recall that there was
where he called, I think,
Judge Chikopa from
Judge
Malawi,
Chikopa from Malawi.
And fired by Professor Musonda, and there were 3 other judges in 2012. And I took offense to that, and I thought that President Sata was trying to compromise the judiciary. So the day after, I actually went to television stations
to air your views.
To air my views
Your
about
objection.
how destructive was that. So in that process, I decided to try and see whether I could get the opposition together. And so I called President Hakainde and explained what had happened. I called Elias Chipimo. I visited Wamilupi. He had his own party. And I was already in the MMD. Although I was not in the structure, I had been part of RB's campaign committee team, if you recall.
Yes.
And Major Kachingwe and the NEC were using me as a resource person to try and get MMD rebooted. So I knew all of the leadership. And so I managed to convince the MMD and all of the political party came together. The first meeting we held was at the secretariat of the UPND I think they were in Lagos Road at the time, and to start the fight against those judges. Before even the NGOs got involved, we started that. The NGOs eventually also joined in, and not joined us, but just also saw what the issue was until that issue was dropped, if you recall. Now, during that time, I used to have even General Mianda. I called General Mianda as well, and he also came because he was president of Heritage at the time. So we started to work together as the opposition, and I had a lot of dealings with him during that period. Again, my impression was, I think it was more negative than positive. I have to be very honest with you. And at that point, Dora had joined in to be part of the secretariat, because we were the secretariat for that same whole group. And my impression was a person who was very strong-headed, a person who really was not very keen not to have his views heard and implemented over other people. And he struck me as a person who was full of hubris. Let me use that word, who was full of hubris. But I wasn't certain until when he now became president. You can see that those characteristics come through. The president seems to be a man with a lot of hubris. And I think that it is dangerous for a leader to have that sort of hubris. The last press conference, for example, I think he mentioned to 3 ministers, which I thought was rather improper. I think that he was pointing out to the Minister of Home Affairs, you are very lucky to be a minister, and said some other thing on the minister, and the cameras were and I think that, again, he was like to point out that I am the boss and I am the one who knows all. Then, within a short period, he then pointed out to Mutati. He said, no, I was arguing with Mutati. He was saying this thing cannot be done in 3 months or whatever. And I convinced him that this, and it worked. Then he went to I think, the Minister of Mines and so on. So, and I remember at that point, I said, you know what? This is what Kaunda used to do in the end of his days. Because Kaunda was very disciplined. President Kaunda was one of the most disciplined individuals I've ever had. With almost all aspects of life, with money, with women, with ego, with whatever. The old man was very disciplined. But as they say, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. By the time President Kaunda had become super keen and was sometimes even a bit unfair to his minister, he would even, you stand up and whatever. It was near the end of his term. In the beginning, he wasn't like that.
He was very humble.
Now, what our president was doing at that press conference, I immediately thought of KK when he was at
his height.
At the height of his power just before he left. And I said to myself, you know, it took KK 30 years, literally 30 years to get to, in power. Because, I mean, people talk about 27. I mean, sometimes we forget that Kaunda was head of government in 1962.
Yeah.
And then 1963, by the end of 1963, in January, he was prime minister. So this man was literally in charge of this country for almost 30 years.
Yes.
And I said to him, it took him 30 years to be affected by power. Our current president, it has taken him
just 2 years.
And already you can see that the influence of power has gotten to him. So the question you ask is, how did I know? I knew him through this. Now, of course, as I said, there were many other meetings. There was a meeting I had with him to try and convince him to be the running mate to Arabi. I was an envoy myself, and we were working together with Uncle Vijay. And then the things broke up because...
You are an academic. You are well-traveled. You served as a diplomat. You served as an economist at Ministry of Finance. You've been a politician. You were close to many heads of state, President Kaunda, Rupiah
Yes, of
Banda.
course I have.
Where is President Hakainde Hichilema failing? First, on the economy, and I'm glad first you decided to describe his character, because there are some flaws there with his character.
Yeah.
But coming to the issues of the economy and the direction of our country.
Yeah, but that's the reason why I started that way. Because I have no hatred whatsoever. Honestly speaking, I have no hatred for President Hakainde whatsoever. But my concern about his approach and attitude, I think, is clearly retrogressive to development. When a leader feels that they are the only ones who know, that no one else should object, that all of the other people around are subservient, you always create a problem. It happened at some point to Chilua, okay? It happened, as I said, to KK, and we can look at other areas. And for some people, it happened later on, after they taste power. For him, it has happened very quickly, partly because it is his character. As I said, I met him before he was president. And I think that he has got a very strong character which aims to diminish the light of everybody else and focus all that light on himself. And the danger of that is that you become a mini dictator, a mini messianic figure, where all the others are not so sure to what extent they can advise.
Teamwork must have collapsed.
I think that it appears that teamwork has collapsed, and he wants to have control, micromanage everything, and you can tell. For example, there is a presidential implementation team at State House there.
Do we need that? Do we need that?
No, precisely. I mean, what are the line ministry doing? And which has now involved a huge budget, which was not there in other people. You have the ACC, DEC, and so on, under the president. Under the president, they were independent association, and so on. So you get the impression of a person who wants to, micromanage everything, which eventually collapses. You remember the picture of John Cecil Rhodes with his legs from Cape Town to Cairo, and then the strings and doing that. That is the impression I get that this presidency is all about. That within just Zambia, that is the approach he wants to take. I think it's a very bad approach, because then you are the one thinking up of everything, and invariably you make a mistake. Because corporate governance, best companies in the world work on the basis where there is a chairman, there is a managing director, and there are all those checks and balances within your own system. Division of labor. Division of labor within your own system. Immediately you get rid of that, you then create what? You create the word dictator, and not from an offensive point of view. The word dictator as in the sense that this person is doing everything, and you're dictating everything, and you're not allowing the organization to breathe and to come into form of its own and to create innovation and creativity. So you stifle that, and in the end you make some mistakes. And some of those mistakes are quite evident.
The economic policies is pursuing, if any?
Well, I believe that...
You know, the UPND had so-called 10-point plan in opposition. And you would think that now that they're in government, we should have had some economic rescue plan. You were in charge of national development plans. I think you developed some of the early ones.
In fact, I'm actually the one who was the focal point person for the development of the 5th National Development Plan at the Ministry of Finance. I was the one who was a key driver towards the development of the Vision 2030. Time frames and so on, and even the district strategic programs. I was the one. And superintending even the implementation of the poverty reduction strategy program. If you remember.
At the time.
I was not the director, but I had all of these responsibilities which were given to me to ensure that these things go. So I think I've got a fairly good knowledge about the operations of economic management in this country.
So where is it gone wrong?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that they've gone wrong, and I said this earlier, is that they have done a similar issue with what the MMD did when they came into power, and that they have taken an extreme ideological approach towards the management of this country, okay? Which in this country has proved to always create problems. So when you need, in the beginning, it was not very ideological. They were practical. Then they began now to become too ideological and lost control. The MMD, when they began for them, they were an extreme ideological position. The UPND also have done that. So that if you look at the policy towards the mining sector, and all of the rebates and concessions and tax incentives that have been given, they have been given on the basis of an ideological issue. Now, I know Dr. Sokotwani very well, and I think that he's someone I respect dearly. But I also do know that Dr. Sokotwani is fairly ideologically inclined towards the free market. And he believes that the private sector should be left fairly free to do what they're doing with as little controls as possible. I think that is a wrong ideological mistake. Now, I'm not saying it's Dr. Sokotwani, but I think that is what has been adopted. He's a businessman, of course, and obviously we all know that he's influenced quite significantly by the Brenthurst Foundation and those who have taken that ideological frame. So I think that the first issue is an ideological one, that some of the policies that they are implementing have already let them down because of the belief in the capacity of the market to regulate itself and manage itself. Hence where the exchange rate is today.
It's on free fall.
It's on free fall without any attempt to try and assist it. Now, the ideological frame is that you can't do that because it will be worse. Now, there are alternative arguments towards this. And in other cases, for a situation that we are in, people have made interventions. Of course, the argument we will be told is that our fiscal space is very limited. But as I said, if you are creative, you can actually come out with something that would be able to manage the economy a little bit better. Now, when I heard the first budget of the UPND, I felt that the budget was similar to the last budget of the MMD. Okay? And I thought that was problematic.
The 2010, 2011 one.
That's right. Yeah, that it was very similar. In terms, even with some of the when Dr. Sokotwani was Minister of Finance, and the difficulties of me seeing that similarity is that budget, the similar budget which was presented in 2010 for 2011, was being presented at a time when, one, we were going through elections, but most importantly, when the economy was doing very well. You know, Because in 2007, our growth rate was 7%. In 2006, I think it was 6.8 or somewhere like that. So the parameters of that budget were very much based on the structure of the economy when the economy was doing very well. The budget that was presented, the first budget, was similar, including the upscaling of the CDF and so on, at a time when the economy was not doing so well. So my fear was that some of these parameters will not be met because of the state of the economy. I think there is over-ambition in terms of what is being thought of. And I thought that it might create some difficulties. CDF, which was one of the places that was upscaled. I have said this thing before. The idea of upscaling CDF was actually an MMD idea, derived out of the district strategic programs. But there was a hold in upscaling it because when we did a due diligence at the time when I was at the Ministry of Finance, we discovered that there was insufficient capacity at the district and the local level to be able to manage those resources, and that there will be a lot of
loss, pilferage,
that's right,
and poor absorption capacity.
We had decided that it would be postponed until we could increase the capacity in those areas. But as you know, the MMD then loses
power to the PF
office. Now, when the PF came, I think that they suspended that particular aspect and concentrated on forming more districts rather than decentralizing in the manner in which this is being done. But President Sada chose to increase districts and to remove some headquarters and so on. And I think in that process kind of forgot some of the issues which were quite available at the time. So here you have a situation where even in CDF, there is exactly what we had feared. In some cases, there's insufficient allocation. Even so, people are saying, no, it's being allocated. But I know some areas where the allocation has been quite low. Then there is also absorption capacity is in many areas is not there. There are a few areas where they're doing very well, but in a lot of areas, there is a lack of absorption. Now, even in the areas where there seems to be some improvement, I think that as the audits are being done, you will discover that there will be a lot of leakages in it. Now, am I saying it's a bad policy? I'm not saying so. I think that it was rushed, and I think that it was rushed for a political purpose. Tried to persuade him not to stay, yeah. And Nyerere politely insisted that he needed to go.
Because Nyerere resigned
in 1985.
Far earlier than
in
Dr.
1985. Wow. Maybe you can't say far earlier, but it was really a term because I think that the last term, I think the old man should have left in 1988. If you want, because clearly the world was changing and the struggle we had achieved, we were almost near the end. It was just apartheid, which was almost done.
Namibia and South Africa was only remaining by 1988.
Yes, that is right, yes. No, Namibia has already gone. Namibia had, I think Namibia had gone because as we was saying before the program, no, maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah,
because my dad went to, yes, that's right.
We weren't set up because Namibia became independent in 1990.
Yes.
And then South Africa.
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying, that our struggle really around the region had more or less been concluded. Yeah, it had actually more or less been concluded. And at that point, I think that
because Mozambique was independent.
That's right.
Zimbabwe was independent.
Angola and so on. So and even South Africa, it was quite clear which trajectory. Although the old man was very influential in the end days, a lot of people may not know this, but even to ensure that Mandela became president and Thabo declined, that was the old man. He was the go-between, even with the Boers themselves. Well, with the government. Yes, that's right. The Afrikaans.
Media term.
That's right. The Afrikaans and so on. So, as I said, when Mandela also had announced that he would do one term and that he was finally going to do, the old man actually tried to persuade him that he shouldn't leave. And I know this because, as I said, I was already his assistant, and he flew down to South Africa. and they had
Why
a meeting.
did you think Nyerere should stay on and Mandela should also stay on?
Yeah, because that's why I'm saying that I think that one of his difficulties is that he believed in a sense of the importance of the one in development. And I think that he believed it beyond where I and many people would not believe. Okay? So even when the UNIP members came to request that he comes back in UNIP, it was an easy thing for him to do because
he believed in that.
He believed that, you know, he had a value. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that because, as I said, I adore the old man in many ways, but I'm looking at the downside. I think that his biggest weakness was that he overstayed, and he believed really in the power of the one individual over the rest. Although he was very consultative in the beginning, and only in the end did, as I said,
power become unilateral.
Power can corrupt.
His economic policies?
Yeah, as I said, I think that the problem with the economic policies came when they became ideological. In the beginning, the Mlungushi reform, the Matero reform, even the acquisition of ZCCM, I think was done from a very practical point of view. When now we decided to become ideological because of the Eastern influence, at that point we started making mistakes. So the redemption of the Zimco bonds in 1973 was a very ideological issue. It cost us a lot of money. And the overreach of government wanting to do everything now became ideological. But from 1964, it took 4 years before the Mulungushi reforms and material reforms of 68 and 69. And even those, as I said, they were quite moderate. They were actually very moderate. It was an absolute acquisition. The problem, I think, started really in the mid...
When we're a one-party state.
In the mid-70s. And then we became progressively ideological and started taking ideological decisions and not practical decisions.
Chiluba,
the same. As I said to you, that the problem is that they began with an ideological position. Okay? Stopped development planning, no participation of the government in
the market.
In the market, and became very ideological. I think that Chiluba's positive side is that Chiluba was actually quite a nice person. I mean, I met him earlier, but I'm sure you worked with him.
Yes.
And Chiluba was actually quite a nice person, even when you quarrel. And I think that he also went in it with a good heart. I think that he was captured by, as I said,
by the many forces.
By the many forces that they're working for me. And then he decided that he had to gain control. And in that capacity of him trying to gain control, he also learned the tactic of playing. Remember I told he began to play them. But I think that his greatest weakness for me was the fact that he was unprepared to further democratic norms. Hence the change of the constitution, the barring of a main opponent, and then lack of good corporate governance in the manner in which the privatization process was done. Because there are a lot of questions. I know that I don't want to go to the idea of corruption, but of course those accusations were there. There were a lot of accusations that were made of corruption. And I think that was because of lack of corporate governance that had been put in place. Let me give you an example. The privatization of Luasha mines, for example. The main bidder at that point was First Quantum Minerals, which had done everything. And they were about to sign with ZDA because they had been given one of the tailings dams, which they were producing very well. Wanam Kubwa, yes. And because of the profits and things they were generating, they decided to bid for Luasha. They put all the specs into place, and they were on the verge of signing what was actually a better deal than which was signed with Ramco.
Indians, yeah.
Just on the eve of signing that agreement, the Francis Kaunda team, which was appointed, if you recall, took over the negotiations from ZDA on the behest of the president that they should take over. Then, when they took over, they threw out First Quantum and gave it to Ramcos. To Banana, I think it was, yeah. And First Quantum actually took issue, and I think they threatened to sue, because they believed that there was insider dealing and that there was underhand method. Now, in the end, the purchase price that First Quantum was offering ended up being much higher than
the new buyers.
Almost half what the first bidder was offering, and then all of the issues and commitments which they had said they would fulfill, they never fulfilled, and as a result, we had a disaster later by them withdrawing. Then you had that issue with Luanshya, and if you recall, it put Luanshya on the map, because shortly after that, we even won. UNIP won a seat.
Yeah, in Ron with Cameron Puele.
With Cameron Puele, which was not the only one. I mean, that again goes to the argument we are playing, that was he going to win? UNIP was actually winning back
some seats,
and so on. So I think that lack of good corporate governance is very important, and it was a weakness of President Chiluba, in my view, which is similar.
We come to Mwanawasa.
Yeah. I was a civil servant during Mwanawasa's administration. I was working at the Ministry of Finance.
This is where the Ministry of Finance.
I was at the Ministry of Finance. I was, when I left the Ministry of Finance, because if you recall, I had quit, stood in 2006. Then I was economic advisor to the government, but working under JICA, okay, but still dealing with 12-line ministries in terms of promoting economic growth. And then I eventually went to ZDA. This was all during Mwanawasa's program. I think that one of the problems that, the good things about Mwanawasa, he was able to bring back the country from being an extreme right wing back to the center. Okay? So, it was under Mwanawasa's administration that we began to plan again. Hence the 5th National Development Plan and the Vision 2030, the district strategic programs, and also what was referred to as activity-based budgeting. That was under Mwanawaza. And the idea was that you cannot allow the private sector to be in complete control. And Mwanawaza was very good at bringing this to the center. Okay? I think that really helped.
Rupiah Banda.
Oh, okay. Rupiah Banda, I think his greatest asset was that he did not disturb the good things which were happening at that
he found.
And as a result, the economy actually exponentially grew even faster under Arabi, which a lot of people don't know this, but under Arabi, for example, the production of maize jumped from 1.2 at the end of Mwanawasa's administration to 3 million by 2011. The production of cotton, the production of soya, even the production of the mines jumped significantly from...
You know, the loss, we wish we had more time, the loss of Arabi is a mystery, because this is a man who had a good economy running but lost the election.
He had a very good economy running, and I said that one of his greatest achievement was that he did not interfere with the process. So he enhanced it. He added on Mwanawasa's ministers other people which were doctors and people who he thought were very competent, and then he kind of let go. Arabi was not as interfering in the running of government as other presidents are. He was very laid back, and of course I'm also saying this because I was fairly close to him. I was not the special assistants who were there, but I can honestly say that he called upon me many times outside that area, and that I also called on him many times. I initiated to go advise on things which I thought were going wrong, and he was very receptive to me because our relationship went back.
Why did he lose elections?
I think that one of the reasons was that MMD had overstayed in power.
It had done 20 years.
It has done 20 years, and progressively, a chunk was being taken out of the MMD. So Michael Sata took out a chunk, BY took out a chunk.
It started with Mazoka in 1998.
That is right. They were all taking off chunks of the MMD. When Manawasa came through, one of the difficulties that Arabi had was that when the transition took over, some of the people who were very loyal to President Manawasa were not so keen on him. So there
So
was
again,
a
you
rift.
had to separate with those.
They had to separate with them, so a rift developed. People like Magandi and others. And he wasn't
George
the only one.
Mpombo.
Others, he managed to convince them, but many actually began to undermine him in the party, as well as going to other political parties to undermine him. And he simply did not have control of the party. Partly because of that, and partly because he was seen as an outsider. As a unipist who had just... So within the 3 years, I think he was unable to really control the machinery of the party. And
that would enable his re-election.
Yes, so that was one of the factors. So there's the issue of the MMD, there was the issue of that. I think that there was also an issue of the current issue, for example, that has just been raised, the issue of the Barosiland agreement issue.
It wasn't handled well.
I don't think it was handled well. If you recall that there was some riot, there was some shooting, and he didn't handle it very well. I mean, obviously, I can say that I and several close friends outside that had a discussion with him on how we thought this matter should have been handled. But he gave his reasons why he took the approach he took, which I think many of us...
The hardline approach.
It was hardline, and not so much that it was a hardline. You know, sometimes you have to be able to negotiate your way into these things. And there were a number of things that had happened which I think that gave him the reluctance to follow a certain path. I think those I cannot say. I would be abusing my trust. But the fact that the issue was not well handled showed in the elections, because in 2008 and 2011, Arabi lost 90,000 votes from one province. That was Western Province. And I think it was largely due to the Barose Agreement issue, which of course also President Michael Sata took
capitalized
advantage
on, because it became a campaign issue.
Campaigned on it, and even the current administration also capitalized on it, because the UPND also took what I would say a similar view to what President Sata took. And Arabi lost 90,000 votes. It was very clear. Now, if you consider the fact that the difference between President Sata and Arabi was 183,000 votes, okay?
So half of that
came from one province.
Yeah, because PF won some seats in Nalolo and Mongo.
That is right. So that issue, I think, was one of the issues. And there were several other issues, I think. I think that also... those people who wanted to paint Arabi in a negative light largely succeeded to do so. Of course, I think primarily led by the Post. By the Post newspapers. Because I think that there were some, and I'm being as honest, there were some outrageous accusations which were represented as facts, which were actually not facts. And many people believed it. I mean, one of them I was involved in. In fact, I was involved in maybe two of some of the accusations. I know there was NAPSA, 15 million, whatever, which ZDA was handling, which was not true. There was the issue of RP Capital, if you remember, about the privatization of Zamtel. I was the head of privatization at ZDA at that time. And many of the things that were being said were just not accurate. Now, as I said, this is not the basis of the program, but maybe at another time we can go into some. So,
Michael Sata.
Well, of course, I was going to say that he was maligned. Then there was also the fact that Michael Sata was very astute. You know, Michael Sata was very astute at growing his party and had a message which was very captive to the audience. And he managed to convince a lot of people much more than Arabi had, given the fact that he would weaker power within the MMD, and there was this onslaught, constant onslaught on Arabi by people who had decided that by any means necessary, Arabi must be dropped. But I think that even in the face of that, there are issues which could have been done within the MMD, which may have changed the outcome. But we are looking at pros and cons. Yeah. Arabi was, as you know, you worked with him as well. He was a very amiable person, very funny, very human. He treated everybody as human beings, and he was just altogether a very, very decent individual. And I think that in as much as people might take issue with this, I think that had Arabi won a second term, people would have seen the side of him which did not come out because of the onslaught, and these other issues. So that is
Arabi. And on Michael Sata?
Michael Sata, my view is that the greatest gift that Michael Sata had an incredible ability to have connectivity with the population, with the masses. That he had it. Even under UNIP, it was
the same.
It was the same. He had an incredible ability for connectivity. That is one. Secondly, Michael Sata was a very practical person. Okay, it was a very pragmatic person. In 2006, he had budgeted me to stand on PF ticket, and I was refusing. And finally, he said, "Okay, let's have a meeting, you and I." He kept on budget. So we had a meeting at Omelo Mwamba at his house with him for 3 hours or so on. We were arguing, and one of the things I said to him, I said, Mr. Sata, the only problem I have with you is that you seem to be. I didn't use the word cantankerous. I can't remember, but I was saying you are a bit cantankerous and so on, and you don't want to listen to others. And he said to me, I listen to people. I listen. I'm a very practical person. Let me tell you. The bridge in Lusaka, the flyover bridges,
the two of them.
He started giving me examples.
The three of them.
Yes, the three of them. He gave me several examples. In Lundazi, there was some project and whatever. He said, you know what? These projects were not my projects. Those projects were other people's projects. And he said, they told me, and I took them and ran with them. And I saw the practicality of him. He was very practical, and he had the capacity to run those programs. And it showed when he came into office. The downside of Michael Sata is that he was haphazard, I would say. Okay,
because of his pragmatism.
Because of his pragmatism, he was quite haphazard, and as a result, he sometimes did not fully think things through from a more analytical, academic approach. And sometimes you can have all of your gifts in being a practical thinker, but there comes a time when you need the
planning has to kick in.
Yes, the planning has to kick in, and he wasn't very good at that issue. And I think that within the 3 years that he was there, in many ways it was quite clear. He was also quite susceptible to people who he liked. And some of those could mislead the president. And I know many cases where I think that the president was misled by others, like the suspension of those judges. I know for a fact that it was not his idea. There were other people,
other forces
who pushed him to do it. And there were other cases. But I think that the biggest problem really with Sata, in my view, was that he was not a very structured person. He was pragmatic, but he was not a very structured person. And I think that eventually filters through to the way he was governed. But he was pragmatic and certainly had a gift. Yeah.
Edgar Lungu.
Of all the presidents, I knew Edgar Lungu the least for me. Okay? Really, honestly, I knew Michael Sata more. I knew Arabi, I knew Chilua and so on. I really didn't know President Edgar Lungu myself. I had heard one or two things about him, but I didn't know. I think that his greatest strength, having worked under him, of course I didn't have almost zero contact. I met him, I think during the presidency, I only met him when he called me himself again to have a discussion similar to what we had with Chilua many years earlier, and I went into the Foreign Service. And then I think I met him once when he came to Congo Brazzaville for some international conference for the Great Lakes region. But I think that what my brother said yesterday regarding the Constitution of 2016 will probably go down as one of his greatest achievements. I think that, and that has been my view even before.
Prior.
John said it. I'd always thought that the courage in which he exhibited to implement these issues which were retrogressive, would possibly be retrogressive to him, was a lot of courage. And I think that he did. Now, of course, there were some slippages, okay? But that is one of his greatest issues. Also, the fact that he was very keen to develop infrastructure.
Yeah.
I think that is also something that was very positive about President Lungu. The downside, in my view, was that he was too, how do I put it? He let go a little bit too much. A leader must exercise balance. Keke was very strong. Yeah. Okay? As I said, Arabi was very hands-off, but he controlled. But with President Lungu, I think he let it go a little bit too much. So you had fiefdoms who then took control, who also began to take control in particular areas, and that created, in my assessment of the situation, created the situation where, for example, the cadres became too strong. Yes. Now, I like cadres. I was national secretary and I've been working with cadres all my life. But, cadres need guidance. Yeah, true. Okay? And sometimes they can be very forceful. And you have to have the tact and the strategy to keep him, to have guardrails, okay? I believe that President Lungu lost that. Yeah. And it was one of the greatest issues, my brother, that cost him. So that was one. And I think that even the manner in which HH was then treated was also a big mistake, in my view. Because when you begin to do that, what you end up doing is promoting that the opponent. And I think that it was really, really disappointing for me to have HH being stopped from jumping on a plane or whatever. And I said it to people who are close enough, that this thing is going to backfire. It's going to backfire and is going to promote. Because Zambians begin to feel sympathetic. And begin to look at you as the not so good guy. And I think that was an issue. Now, I also think that one of the biggest problems of the PF, both under President Sata and President Lungu, was there was insufficient control and approach towards the money that we were borrowing. Because I do know, for example, that the first Eurobond was done under President Michael Sata, and there were a lot of promises that Zambia Railways, blah, blah, blah. And many of these issues were not, I think that the resources were not used to the extent that they could have been properly used to assist with economic development. And I think that part of that was lack of, as I said, lack of control and too many fiefdoms within the governance structure of the PF. And I was a victim of some of those myself. So, but that is a story for another thing. The current one. Yeah, because that is the one. Yeah, the current one, I think that, let me say that the issue of hubris, I've already said. I think that The second issue, which he is not handling well,
Yeah.
the current president, is the issue of promoting democratic space. And it is
You fought for democracy.
all the time.
This becomes a personal project for you.
Yes, it's a personal project for me, and sometimes it hurts me to see that he, as a president of the republic, who was
He's a beneficiary of the democracy.
beneficiary of what many of us were doing in 1990, 91, 92, to try and expand democracy, and has now benefited by becoming the president of the republic, wants to now close the space of democracy. And clearly, no matter what they say, the UPND, there is a close of the democratic space. People are not able to meet, unable to have rallies, people are being arrested for... I agree that maybe my brother Sean Tembo can be a bit excessive sometimes, but that does not justify the treatment they've given him. The way you were harangued and, you know, the way... I mean, there is, for the first time, I feel that there is fear in the country.
Yeah.
I have colleagues who want to speak to me about national issues and will never do it by calling me directly. They will say, oh no, I want to discuss this, call on WhatsApp, because there is the impression, I don't know whether it's correct, that it's a more secure line. People are afraid. I meet civil servants who say, you know, these and things, but how we can't, you know. And so there is actually fear that this government is brutal. Now, perception is very important in politics. It is more important than reality. I think that the current government seems to be very intolerant to people's opinion. And they're very quick to accuse the victim of being the aggressor.
Yeah.
Okay? And I think that if he doesn't sort this thing out, it will end up being one of his biggest Achilles heels.
Yeah.
Because he seems to be quite intolerant to criticism, which means that you don't believe in the democratic system. What he has done to the PF, no matter what anyone tells me, I am 99.9% convinced that a great deal of the issues that are happening in the PF regarding Mao, Sampa, and so on are all supported by the current administration. And that the role that has been played by the judiciary and the legislature in supporting what I call as nonsense, okay, is being controlled by the governing party. They can deny it all they want until they are blue in the face. But clearly, this to me is an indication of greater problems to come in the future in terms of closing the space of democracy and moving us towards a one-party state. I know that it sounds extreme. Okay? I know that it sounds extreme. But believe me, my brother, I have seen these movements before. I saw him with Chilua, okay, which has ended up in burying other people. You know, we saw it with the judges in the PF. It was heading a particular direction, okay, and he's doing similar things. I think that is second header. The last one before I get to the
last one, yes, is the issue of the opposition, because with these failings by President Hakainde Hichilema, the people of Zambia would like to look towards the opposition. As you discuss the opposition and just largely with the state of our democracy as we begin to wind up.
I think that the state of our democracy, from my perspective, is composed of two sides. There is the governing party and, of course, the opposition. Of course, there's civil society, but let me just discuss these two as the main players in a multi-party state, the opposition and the government. We have spent exhaustively talking about the government. We rarely talk about the opposition. I think that one of the biggest problems we have in this country is that our political parties in the opposition tend not to be institutionalized, so that the majority of them are based on one messianic or cult figure who has no checks and balances within that institution. It's as if they own that party. And I think that the electorate can see it. That is why most of the times these political parties that appear to be owned by an individual end up getting less than 1% or 1% in the elections, as was the case in the last election. I would like to see a situation where the opposition political parties are institutionalized, follow their constitutions, and they've got checks and balances within the institution so that the leader is not the owner and the alpha and the omega. I think that that is very important, because if we don't do that, then our democracy will always be limited. Let's get to the PF. I am not a member of the PF, but I would like the PF to survive. And given the fact that two other political parties who left government have all ended up in a situation where they exist on paper, okay? I would like the PF not to go that direction. And I think that the PF have to study the reasons why UNIP and MMD went that direction, because if they don't, regardless of the fact that we acknowledge that the governing party seems to be involved in the events of the PF, sooner or later they will have to take the responsibility. And I know you are, but you are not interviewing. I think we're not having this discussion from that point. But I think that they have to take responsibility, or else it will be a sad situation. I am hoping that if there will be a new party born, because I know that there are a lot of discussion of wanting whatever, oh, this one is thinking of forming a political. People have even called me, we hear. I said, no. I am hoping that if there will be a different political party that will be formed, I hope that it will be on the basis not of one. I hope that it will be a collection of talented individuals who are peers, who will elect a structure which everyone will buy into, which will be within an institutional framework of that political party.
You saw the framework of 1990 and MMD.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. We need to go back to a framework of 1990, MMD, or UNIP in 1958 and 59. Kaunda was not the alpha and the omega of that party. You had Wachona, you had Kapwepwe, you had a collection of Kalichinis. You had people from everywhere, okay? And that is what we need to replicate in our country. We have too many people who are ambitious and want to be president. And then I have been a recipient of so many people coming to my house, offering me, can you be vice president in my party, or can you be secretary general in my party? And I've refused. I said, it's not that I am disrespecting you. I think the minute you join a party on the basis that come and be mine, then you lose the plot. You must be able to be part of a collective of peers. So I think that, and then institutionalize the organization, that there is no one single individual. I think that that's the next step in our development. But let me just say one thing which I think is very important about the current government. Because I know we may be running out of time. The ethnic issue.
Yeah.
A lot of people are afraid to discuss this ethnic issue. I think that if we don't handle the sentiments that I am picking up from all over the country about exclusion, and it is not only about the Kumozi Kumawa issue. It is not. It is not only that we've had the issue to do with the Barotseland issue recently. I know that there are many people and many provinces that there are whispers of exclusion, and directing that a certain group are the owners of this issue. The defense when these accusations are put is that you are haters and you never wanted us there anyway.
Yes.
I think that that is a very dangerous strategy. And it may be a serious Achilles heel of this government. If this issue of everyone feeling included, or people, or men, everyone has to feel included. And this government does not seem to be handling this matter very well. And my plea is that they will begin to relook at this matter, the way appointments are made, the way the way the representation of equality is done. I think it's a very interesting matter. I think they're not handling it well, and they should change.
Oh, wonderful. Who's your best president among the seven?
Well, I think, these things are very personal.
Yeah.
Unless you had a barometer, okay? I think that sometimes it's very difficult to compare tenures. Okay? I would say that Kaunda should be excluded from this because I don't think it's a fair comparison to someone who was there for literally 30 years and is the father of the nation. And I think that he can. I certainly think that he cannot be put in the same comparative with the ones that
on the 6.
Yeah, of the 6, I probably if I was to rank him, I would say probably Mwanawasa would be the most likely. Although I don't think that he was perfect.
Of course.
I don't think that he was perfect.
They had their own flaws.
I think he handled certain issues in a manner which I disagree with. But I think on the balance of probability, I would probably say Mwanawasa.
Yeah.
Now, you also have to take note, my brother, that Mwanawasa did 7 years. So there is 7 years to assess. But Michael Sata and Arabi did 3 years. And I think that is difficult to include those two. So I think you can compare maybe Chilua, Mwanawasa and Lungu, who did comparatively the same. And the one that is there now, I think has started off on a bad note. And really, honestly, and I think that if he doesn't change, he may end up coming at the bottom of the 7. And that has nothing to do with ethnicity. Yeah. Because I know that is where they always rush, that if you evaluate someone, then it is because you didn't want Tonga to be president. No, that is...
the purpose of the conversation is to deepen political understanding.
That's right, country. Yes.
I think this has been lost along the way, and we might attribute it to generation change, because then there is history lost. And, our education system doesn't do well with our recent history. So I think the more meaningful conversations we have, people will now understand that when we raise criticism, we're not being personal. Or we don't want one to lose power or that we didn't like them. It's for the best, for the best of our country. Yeah. What are your last words?
Yeah, I think that I am looking forward, truly, to the current government, because they're the emotive issue right now, to the current government doing everything possible to expand freedoms of the democratic system to make it better rather than to reduce them. I think that point is very significant. I am looking forward to the opposition political parties becoming stronger and more structured and less dependent on the personal ambitions of individuals. I think it's very important. I'm looking forward to the PF restructuring itself properly within that framework. I am saddened at the fact that the cost of living in this country is atrociously high, and that the government appears powerless in providing an alternative solution apart from one which appears has been given to them by external sources. Let me just put it at that level. And again, like the ethnic issue, I think that if this government does not balance external influence policy framework with domestically generated policy framework, that they will falter. And they may end up putting the country in a lot of trouble. And that we must all prevent by trying to be an opposition which is fair, but aggressive enough so that the government can be threatened to do certain things within the realm of politics.
Wonderful. Muhabi James Lungu. I think there's a window for our viewers that they've now known who Muhabi Lungu is. With this conversation, we'll call you for tighter, time of maybe 1 hour just to discuss specific issues. But this was an introduction of who you are, why you do what you do, the values you bring to the table, and the meaningful debate we should have about our country. There are many things that are threatened, including our peace and security. Our unity is fracturing. The economy is not doing well. We need to have honest conversations about these things, including truth to the authorities.
Yes.
Because there is a sense of fear, like you say, where people are not willing to discuss ideas. And they're compartmentalized, are you PF, are you PND? And they don't want to have that national discourse. So I'd like to thank you for sparing so much time. I know you have so much to say, because you are one of the few privileged people that have this span of life. We could even have gone for 6 hours.
Yeah. No, I'm grateful too, Ambassador. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. And I hope that there may be another opportunity, as you say, to look at more things. And I'm also very grateful to God.
Yeah.
I'm a person of faith. I think that all these nice things you're saying about me are not because of my greatness or intelligence. Sometimes I think that it's just God's blessing and grace. Yeah.
Yeah, amen to that. So until next time, until we have another personality, God bless you, God bless our country, and shalom.